Hey everyone, this is a section from Marcel van der Linden's Western Marxism and the Soviet Union. This section is about Grandizo Munis and the hell is his first name? Is it Benjamin Pere? It might be Benjamin if it's, I don't know. Can't know if he's Spanish or not. Munis was Spanish. Anyway, this is what the section says. It says, in Mexico, a small group of Spanish Trotskyists had established itself around 1940 after the fight against General Franco ended in defeat. The animating spirit among these exiles was Emmanuel Fernandez Grandizo, who lived from 1911 to 1989, writing under the nom de guerre G. Munis, who in 1936 had founded the Spanish section of Trotsky's movement for the Fourth International. Some footnotes here. Grandizo was a child of Spanish immigrants to Mexico. In 1930, Grandizo returned to Spain and became politically active there. End footnote. In 1938, Grandizo was imprisoned by the Stalinists, but in the following year, Grandizo managed to escape. Grandizo's close collaborator was the French surrealist poet Benjamin Pere, who lived from 1899 to 1959, who likewise lived for some time in Mexico and had also published on political topics under the pseudonym of, quote, Peralta, end quote. Footnote. Evidence that Peralta was a pseudonym of Pere, who lived from 1899 to 1959, is found in handwriting on the International Institute for Social History's copy of Peralta, 1946. The note states, quote, Peralta, pseudonimo empleado en México y como militante de fomento obrero revolucionario por el poeta francés surrealista Benjamin Pere, G. Munis. End footnote. In 1946, Grandizo and Pere went public with their criticism of the official Trotskyist line. In 1946, Grandizo and Pere went public with their criticism of the official Trotskyist line about the class nature of the Soviet Union. An important stimulus was the, quote, manifesto, end quote, adopted in April that year by a conference of the Fourth International. The most important thesis in this manifesto was that the International's analysis, including of the Soviet Union, had been proved completely correct by all recent events. See Quatrième Internationale, 1946. Pere wrote a very critical pamphlet about the manifesto, which Pere slated as a complacent document, unworthy of the Fourth International, and permeated by self-righteous vanity. Vanité béate. Since the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact at the latest, Pere argued, it should have been clear that nothing was left in the USSR of the gains made by the October Revolution. The bureaucratic counter-revolution had triumphed, and state capitalism had been established. As such, this idea by Pere could hardly claim originality, yet his characterization of the bureaucratic elite showed some novel features. While abandoning Trotsky's theory of the degenerated worker state, Pere also maintained, to a certain degree, Trotsky's conception that the elite was not a ruling class, but another kind of social group. A ruling class, he reasoned, along traditional Marxian lines, had the historic task to develop the social formation, quote, system of property, end quote, which gave rise to it. It therefore fulfilled, at least at the beginning of a historical epoch, a progressive function. The bureaucratic elite in the Soviet Union, however, did not embody any progress, only decadence and decay. The bureaucratic elite in the Soviet Union, therefore, had to be characterized in a different way. Perret offered two possibilities here. 1. On the one hand, the bureaucracy could be defined as, quote, a de facto class whose final structure is still in the process of formation, end quote. If this class were at some time to crystallize itself out, it would be able to fulfill a progressive function comparable to that of the bourgeoisie. 2. On the other hand, the bureaucracy could be defined as a caste, comparable with the Brahmins during the decline of antique Indian culture. Perret believed that evidence of the religious character of such a social group, developing within a civilization in decline, could also be seen in the Soviet Union, where Stalin was gaining the status of some kind of prophet. See Peralta, 1946. Grandizo elaborated on this idea of a, quote, state capitalism without a mature ruling class, end quote, in his pamphlet, The Revolutionaries in the Face of Russia and World Stalinism. In the first instance, Grandizo tried to show with economic arguments that state capitalism existed in the USSR. His lengthy argument was essentially as follows. In capitalism, wage costs are kept as low as possible, and the surplus product, embodied in surplus value, is used by capitalists either for new investments or for unproductive consumption. By contrast, in the transitional society from capitalism to socialism, the distribution of the surplus product would be decided on democratically by the whole population, and the standard of living of the masses would rise. In the development of the Soviet Union, featuring declining buying power of the workers, use of the surplus product for a forced investment policy, and bureaucratic consumption, there was no evidence of the characteristics of a transitional society, but rather of capitalism. Secondly, like Perret, Grandizo tried to clarify the class position of the bureaucracy with a historical analogy. Grandizo compared contemporary international capitalism with the decline of the Roman Empire. When the old empire had entered its phase of downfall, and the transition to feudalism had not yet been completed, a shift in power occurred within the ruling circles. The patricians, the old previously triumphant class, had to make way for new energetic elements lacking genealogy or history. Caesar and Octavianus were the protagonists of this stratum. Caesar and Octavianus extended the power of the state and thus formed a final bulwark against social disintegration. In the same way as these patricians, Grandizo argued, the international bourgeoisie now also experienced difficulties. Like the Romans, the international bourgeoisie was also forced, in the international bourgeoisie's declining phase, to transfer power to elements which ruled in the international bourgeoisie's place, and thus prolong the existence of the system, Social Democrats and Stalinists. State capitalism in the Soviet Union was, viewed from this perspective, a sign of degeneration. The bourgeoisie had been able to strangle the proletarian revolution, but had not succeeded in enthroning a dynamic ruling class. In a much later publication, Grandizo elaborated this thesis further and, as it were, inverted Burnham's theory of, quote, managerial revolution, end quote. The managers in the Soviet Union were just like their Western colleagues, not a ruling class, but rather a symptom of the fact that the old bourgeoisie had lost its grip on events and therefore had created room for reactionary helpers. See Munis, 1975.